Marissa Weiss very much enjoyed her mid-morning run. On that Monday, her trainers pounded the smooth, black asphalt of this suburban residential street, one of a vast network in her upper-middle-class neighborhood. Mature oaks, poplars and sycamores spread their generous canopies over lush, well-tended yards, creating a forest in the outskirts of Atlanta. The road wasn't anywhere near flat, with hills and dips that challenged Marissa to pound harder. She loved the exertion, her well-toned frame taking the topography in stride. It wasn't a race, but Marissa had her own standards, and as her watch beeped, she knew she was right on track. Summertime in Georgia was no joke. The day was already reaching the mid-90s at just shy of 10 in the morning. Marissa panted and gasped up a particularly steep incline, her eyes to the ground as she worked her way up. You wouldn't think it to look at her, but this had become her favorite part of the run. At the crest of the hill, Marissa stopped and paced in circles, hands on hips. She'd stopped in front of a gorgeous colonial-style home. A wide, square-columned, covered porch invited residents and guests alike to take a break in any of its several rocking chairs. A magnolia anchored the left side of the house, cleverly hiding the driveway and garage. Flowers rioted in a number of beds from the porch to the street. It was a lovely home, really. Still, it wasn't the architecture that held her attention. On the right side of the house, a work area had clearly been set up. A wheelbarrow held a mountain of smooth river rock and bags of soil were neatly stacked out of the way until needed. Tools were strewn in piles. Marissa smiled just a little as she peeked surreptitiously from behind her mirrored sunglasses at the very well-built man, currently shirtless and wielding a pickaxe. The Riley guy. His name was Benjamin Thaddeus Riley. He was the son of Maggie and Don Riley, who lived at the house she currently stood before. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him as Benji, or the Riley guy. Growing up, he'd been very industrious, collecting lawn jobs from anyone who'd give him a chance. Marissa and her family had moved to the neighborhood when he'd been 19, and had enjoyed about a year of his service before he graduated high school and went off to college. That was 4 years ago. He'd been home every break, helping his parents, working on projects to supplement his chosen career. Benji was studying landscape design. He had single-handedly designed and installed all of the planting beds in his parents' property. He was a truly impressive young man. She couldn't see his face, but she imagined it taut with concentration, his jaw tight, air whooshing in and out through clenched teeth as he plowed her roughly against the side of the house, just behind the cypress tree. "Good morning, Mrs. Weiss." A startled gasp was Marissa's reply as she came back to the present from her fantasy and found Benji standing at the curb, a bottle of water in each hand. His smile was genuine and almost entirely wholesome. A little gleam in his eye was the only indication that he'd noticed Marissa's deep blush, made darker still by her recent exertion. Clearing her throat, she smiled back and said, "Good morning, Benji. Hard at it again today, huh?" He nodded, then offered her a bottle and tipped the other back into his mouth, taking a deep draught. Gesturing with his head, Benji said, "Would you like to come sit on the porch for a bit? I was going to take a break anyway, and it's really hot out here. You look like you could use a little break." She could have said no. Probably should have. Instead, she smiled and nodded, and followed Benji up the lawn to the inviting shade of the porch. It was nearly 10 degrees cooler under the overhang. Benji sat in one of a pair of rockers at the end closest to the garage. The shade was deeper here, the large magnolia creating a partial screen from the street. It was by no means private, but an illusion of separation was evident. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. Marissa sat in the other rocker, then cracked the water bottle open and took a sip. In truth, she wasn't at all in need of a break. She could have easily finished her run, then done the abdominal set she had scheduled for today. Her perverse side, though, couldn't say no to a sit-down with Benji. Every day it went this way. She'd try to come up with stern reasons why she shouldn't sit with him, yet she'd always relent. Benji was her addiction. He had always been a perfect gentleman. Never crass, always polite and staid. Funny, sure. Marissa thought of it as innocent. He exuded a kind of innocence that, along with his devastatingly good looks and impressive physique, drew her like a moth to a flame. It didn't matter that she was married, that she had 2 children away at summer camp, that she was 23 years his senior. Nothing seemed to matter when she was with Benji, except him. It worried her sometimes, but not while she was with him. He smiled and asked, "So how's your run today, Mrs. Weiss?" Marissa pursed her lips and sked. "Benji, how many times have I told you? Call me Marissa." He chuckled. "My mom would kill me, Mrs. Weiss." "She doesn't have to know, does she?" Marissa smiled. She enjoyed teasing him about his propriety sometimes. "How are they, by the way?" Benji grinned. "Talked to them last night. They're in Singapore. They're really enjoying their trip. I think they're headed to Thailand, then China and Japan, before taking a ship to Hawaii." Marissa leaned back and crossed her legs, lightly rocking. "That sounds so adventurous. Your parents are amazing, hon. Will they be gone all summer?" "Yeah. Another 6 weeks. Plenty of time to get that bed done. It's a surprise for my mom. She loves tulips. I'm going to set a ton of bulbs for her, so next spring she'll get a very pretty crop of them." "Ah, Benji, that's so thoughtful." Marissa took another sip of her water, then set it down on a short table. With a teasing smile, she said, "You planning on having any parties while they're gone?" Benji chuckled, looked down at his lap, then up, catching and holding her eyes. It was a penetrating stare, and Marissa suddenly felt very warm and a little breathless. He smiled a knowing smile and said, "Maybe one." Marissa looked away, down, pressing her lips together and trying to calm her response to what she was sure was a guileless comment. "I should go." She smiled nervously and looked in Benji's general direction, not meeting his eyes. "You enjoy the rest of your day, Benji." As she turned to face the porch steps, Benji's hand wrapped around her wrist. She stilled, looked back at the connection, his big hand making her wrist look delicate. Sparkling firecrackers of sensation burst up her forearm and into her shoulder. Marissa took a deep breath, her lips slightly ajar as she looked back at him. He wasn't smiling, his eyes intense green pools that dragged her into their depths. "You'll come back tomorrow." It wasn't a question. Marissa couldn't believe everything he was implying. She nodded and he released her. Marissa felt like a hare running from a cunning, determined hunter as she took the porch steps 2 at a time and jogged her way to the street. She refused to look back, but felt Benji's stare until she turned the next corner. The rest of her run was disjointed and unfulfilling. Her heart was beating too fast, and her breathing came too quickly. Adrenaline and endorphins crashed through her bloodstream, making her muscles jittery. She was needy as hell when she finally made it home. The kitchen door was unceremoniously slammed shut, and she bypassed the fridge with its bottled water.